I'm Rebecca Martinez, and I used to believe that family meant unconditional support, especially during life's most important moments. At 26, I thought I had everything figured out. I was engaged to the love of my life, had a stable career as a dental hygienist in downtown Phoenix, and most importantly, I had saved every penny for what I dreamed would be the perfect wedding. 18 months of careful budgeting, overtime shifts, and saying no to countless social events had built up a fund of $32,000. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I kept that money in a high-yield savings account that I checked obsessively every morning with my coffee. Each deposit felt like another step closer to walking down the aisle in the ivory silk dress I'd been dreaming about since I was 12. My fiancé Jake Patterson understood my vision completely. We'd spent countless evenings browsing venue websites, tasting cakes at local bakeries, and creating Pinterest boards filled with centerpiece ideas and floral arrangements. The dream wedding wasn't about showing off or impressing anyone. It was about celebrating the moment two people who had found their perfect match decided to build a life together. Jake proposed on a hiking trail overlooking Camelback Mountain during sunset, with a ring his grandmother had worn for 63 years of marriage. The proposal was simple, heartfelt, and everything I could have wanted. Planning the wedding felt like the natural next step in our carefully constructed future. My family consisted of just 3 people who mattered: my mother Elena, my sister Carmen, and me. Dad had passed away when I was 15, leaving Mom to raise 2 teenage daughters on a teacher's salary. Those years taught me the value of hard work and careful financial planning. Mom worked double shifts tutoring students after school to keep us afloat, and I learned early that if you wanted something special, you had to earn it yourself. Carmen was 3 years older than me and had always been the adventurous one. Where I planned and saved, she lived spontaneously and figured things out as she went along. She dropped out of college twice, traveled across Europe with money she'd saved for a car, and currently worked as a freelance graphic designer between what she called creative breaks. Mom often worried about Carmen's lack of direction, but I admired her free spirit even if I couldn't understand it. The apartment Carmen and I shared was a compromise born of necessity and affection. After Jake and I got engaged, he suggested I move in with him to save money for the wedding, but Carmen had been struggling financially and needed a roommate. Family loyalty won out over convenience, and I continued splitting rent on our 2-bedroom place in Tempe while Jake kept his studio apartment across town. Our living arrangement worked surprisingly well most of the time. Carmen's artistic chaos filled the common areas with half-finished paintings, photography equipment, and mood boards for various projects. My corner of the space was organized and purposeful, with wedding planning binders arranged by category and a calendar marking important deadlines. We balanced each other out, or at least I thought we did. The wedding planning process consumed my free time completely, but in the most wonderful way. I researched vendors with the thoroughness of a graduate student writing a thesis. Every decision required multiple consultations, price comparisons, and careful consideration of how each choice would impact the overall budget. The venue alone took 6 months to select. I toured 14 different locations before falling in love with Desert Botanical Gardens Outdoor Pavilion. The garden setting offered natural beauty that would require minimal additional decoration, which helped justify the higher rental cost. Spring in Arizona provided perfect weather, and the desert landscape would create a backdrop more stunning than any manufactured decor. Jake loved the choice immediately, appreciating both the beauty and the practical budget considerations that influenced my decision. Catering presented another significant challenge. I collected menus from dozens of companies, attended 3 bridal shows specifically to taste food samples, and negotiated packages that included everything from appetizers to late-night snacks. The final menu featured Southwestern cuisine that honored our local culture while accommodating various dietary restrictions among our expected guests. Each dish was selected not just for taste but for how it would photograph and how well it would hold up during an outdoor evening event. My dress required 8 shopping trips across 4 different bridal salons. The winner was a stunning creation by a local designer who specialized in destination wedding gowns. The fabric was lightweight enough for desert heat but elegant enough for formal photographs. The price was higher than I'd initially budgeted, but I justified the expense by purchasing shoes and accessories from discount retailers. Jake's involvement in the planning surprised many people, but he genuinely enjoyed being part of the process. He had strong opinions about music, insisted on hiring a band rather than a DJ, and spent weeks researching photographers whose style matched our vision. His groomsmen were his college roommates and his brother, while my side consisted of my best friend since high school, 2 coworkers who had become close friends, and Carmen as my maid of honor. Choosing Carmen as my maid of honor felt natural. Despite our different approaches to life, She was my only sister, my closest family member besides mom, and despite her unpredictable nature, she had always been there for important moments. When I was nervous about starting dental hygiene school, Carmen had driven me to campus every day for the first week until I felt confident navigating on my own. When Jake and I went through a rough patch during our second year together, Carmen had listened to hours of my concerns without judgment and offered practical advice that helped us work through our problems. The maid of honor responsibilities seemed to energize Carmen in ways I hadn't expected. She threw herself into planning my bachelorette party with enthusiasm that bordered on obsession. She created detailed itineraries for a weekend in Las Vegas, complete with restaurant reservations, show tickets, and a spa day that would cost more than some people's entire vacation budgets. I appreciated her effort while gently suggesting we scale back to something more manageable financially. Carmen's artistic eye proved invaluable when selecting flowers and decorations. She had connections with local vendors through her design work, and several offered significant discounts when she explained they were for her sister's wedding. Her ability to visualize how different elements would work together saved us from several potential decoration disasters and helped stretch our budget further than I had thought possible. The financial discipline required for wedding planning felt like a natural extension of habits I'd developed throughout my 20s. Every purchase required careful consideration of necessity versus desire. I maintained a detailed spreadsheet tracking every expense, from the $50 deposits for vendor consultations to the major payments for venue and catering. The spreadsheet became my evening entertainment, updating totals and projecting final costs with the precision of a professional accountant. My work schedule accommodated the wedding planning remarkably well. The dental office where I worked had flexible hours, and my colleagues were supportive of occasional time off for vendor meetings and appointments. Dr. Harrison, the practice owner, had been married for 35 years and enjoyed hearing updates about our progress. His wife had offered to share vendor recommendations from their daughter's recent wedding, creating a network of trusted professionals who understood quality and value. The guest list grew organically from 30 people to 87, each addition carefully considered for their importance in our lives and their impact on our budget. Jake's family was large and close-knit, with cousins and aunts who had been part of his life since childhood. My list was smaller but equally meaningful, filled with friends who had supported me through various life transitions and family members who had remained connected despite geographical distances. Invitations were ordered 4 months in advance from a designer Carmen had found through her professional network. The design reflected the desert botanical theme with subtle cactus motifs and elegant typography that suggested sophistication without ostentation. Each invitation was assembled by hand, a tedious process that Jake and I completed during evening sessions while watching movies and talking about our future together. The wedding timeline was structured around optimal weather and vendor availability. April in Phoenix offered comfortable temperatures and minimal chance of rain, crucial considerations for an outdoor ceremony. The specific date was chosen after consulting multiple vendors to ensure our preferred professionals would be available, and to avoid conflicts with major local events that might impact traffic or accommodation costs for out-of-town guests. My savings strategy had required sacrifice and creativity in equal measure. I took on additional shifts whenever possible, including working during holidays and covering for colleagues during their vacations. My social life became carefully budgeted, with expensive dinners replaced by home-cooked meals and movie theater visits substituted with streaming services and homemade popcorn. Every dollar saved brought the wedding dream closer to reality. The $32,000 represented more than money. It embodied 18 months of commitment to a shared vision of how Jake and I wanted to begin our married life. Each dollar had been earned through extra hours at work, careful meal planning that eliminated food waste, and choosing generic brands over name brands for household supplies. The fund was a testament to the power of consistent effort toward a meaningful goal. Living with Carmen during this intensive saving period had been challenging at times. Her spontaneous lifestyle often included expensive impulse purchases and last-minute travel plans that seemed to contradict everything I was working toward. She would return from weekend trips with stories of amazing restaurants and spontaneous adventures while I stayed home organizing vendor contracts and updating budget spreadsheets. Despite these differences, she never made me feel judged for my choices or suggested I was missing out on life by prioritizing the wedding fund. The relationship between careful planning and spontaneous living created an interesting dynamic in our apartment. Carmen's creative projects often spilled into common areas, while my wedding planning materials occupied specific designated spaces. We negotiated shared expenses like groceries and utilities with mutual respect for our different financial priorities. Her irregular income from freelance work contrasted sharply with my steady bi-weekly paychecks, but we found ways to make our shared expenses work for both of us. My relationship with money had been shaped by watching mom struggle during my teenage years. The uncertainty of never knowing whether unexpected expenses could be covered had motivated me to build financial security from my first job. The wedding fund represented the largest sum I had ever saved, and protecting it felt like protecting my future happiness and security. The engagement ring Jake had given me belonged to his grandmother, but we had it appraised and insured as soon as possible after the proposal. The ring's value was significant, but more importantly, it carried the emotional weight of family history and the promise of lasting love. Wearing it daily reminded me of the commitment we were making and the celebration we were planning to honor that commitment. Carmen's relationship with money had always been complicated, though I didn't recognize the warning signs until much later. She viewed financial resources as fluid, temporary things that were meant to solve immediate problems rather than build long-term security. This philosophy manifested in countless small ways throughout our shared living situation, creating a pattern I should have paid closer attention to. The first incident occurred 3 months after Jake's proposal, when Carmen asked to borrow $200 for what she called an emergency car repair. Her Honda Civic had been making strange noises, and she needed it fixed immediately to meet a client deadline for a logo design project. The repair estimate seemed reasonable, and I transferred the money without hesitation, expecting repayment within the 2 weeks she promised. 2 weeks stretched into a month. Then 6 weeks, before I finally brought up the loan during one of our evening conversations. Carmen's response was casual, almost dismissive. She explained that the client had delayed payment for her design work, which had created a temporary cash flow problem. She assured me the money would be returned as soon as her next project payment arrived, probably within another week or two. That pattern became depressingly familiar over the following months. Carmen would encounter what she described as temporary financial emergencies, usually related to her freelance work or unexpected personal expenses. Each request was accompanied by detailed explanations of why the situation was beyond her control, and confident promises about quick repayment. The amounts varied from $50 for groceries during a lean week to $400 to cover her portion of rent when a client payment was delayed. My response to these requests revealed something about my own character that I'm not entirely proud of. I wanted to be the supportive sister, the reliable family member who could be counted on during difficult times. Each loan felt like an investment in our relationship and a demonstration of the family loyalty Mom had instilled in both of us. I told myself that Carmen would do the same for me if our situations were reversed. The repayment schedule for these loans was consistently optimistic and rarely accurate. Carmen seemed genuinely surprised when promised payment dates arrived without the anticipated client checks or freelance income. She would apologize profusely and provide updated timelines based on new information about upcoming projects or delayed payments from existing clients. Her explanations were always plausible and delivered with such sincerity that questioning them felt unnecessarily suspicious. Carmen's creative career brought irregular income that made budgeting nearly impossible. Some months she would earn $3,000 from multiple projects, while other months produced barely enough to cover basic expenses. She celebrated the good months with expensive dinners and shopping trips, treating financial windfalls as opportunities for immediate gratification rather than preparation for leaner periods ahead. Her approach to money management stood in stark contrast to everything I had learned about financial responsibility. She maintained minimal savings, used credit cards for daily expenses, and seemed genuinely puzzled by my detailed budgeting spreadsheets and long-term planning strategies. When I tried to share advice about emergency funds or retirement planning, she would listen politely but clearly considered such concerns premature for someone her age. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The apartment we shared reflected our different financial philosophies in subtle but telling ways. Carmen's bedroom was filled with expensive photography equipment, high-end art supplies, and designer clothing purchased during prosperous months. My space contained practical furniture, basic electronics, and a notable absence of luxury items that might compromise my wedding savings goals. Our grocery shopping arrangements revealed another aspect of Carmen's relationship with money. She preferred organic produce, specialty items from gourmet stores, and expensive brands that she claimed made significant differences in taste and quality. I focused on generic brands, bulk purchases, and careful meal planning that minimized waste. We initially tried to share grocery expenses equally, but our different standards made this arrangement consistently problematic. The solution we developed involved purchasing separate groceries and maintaining separate shelves in the refrigerator and pantry. This system worked reasonably well, though Carmen would occasionally borrow ingredients when she was cooking for clients or friends. These borrowing incidents were always accompanied by promises to replace the items, promises that were fulfilled sporadically and often with upgraded versions that cost more than the original products. Carmen's social life required financial resources. That seemed to materialize from unknown sources during months when her freelance income was minimal. She attended art gallery openings, designer clothing sales, and weekend getaways with friends whose lifestyle suggested substantial disposable income. When I expressed curiosity about how she managed these expenses during lean months, she would mention mysterious windfall projects or generous friends who covered costs. Her circle of friends consisted primarily of other creative professionals whose financial situations were similarly unpredictable. They shared a culture that prioritized experiences over security, viewing financial stability as potentially stifling to artistic expression. This perspective influenced Carmen's attitudes toward money and reinforced her belief that my careful saving was unnecessarily restrictive. The dynamics between Carmen and our mother revealed another layer of the family financial patterns. Mom had always been the person family members turned to during emergencies, despite her modest teacher's salary and limited savings. She would loan money for car repairs, medical expenses, or temporary housing costs, rarely expecting formal repayment arrangements. This family culture normalized borrowing between relatives and created expectations about mutual financial support. Carmen's requests for money from Mom followed similar patterns to her borrowing from me. The situations were always described as temporary emergencies, the amounts were carefully calculated to seem reasonable, and the repayment promises were sincere but rarely fulfilled according to the original timeline. Mom seemed to accept this pattern as natural family interaction rather than problematic financial behavior. My role in these family financial dynamics was complicated by my steady income and growing savings account. As the only family member with predictable earnings and demonstrable financial discipline, I gradually became the primary resource for emergency situations. Carmen would approach me first for loans, followed by Mom if I was unable or unwilling to help. This pattern reinforced my identity as the responsible family member while enabling Carmen's financial unpredictability. The wedding planning process created new opportunities for Carmen to demonstrate her casual relationship with money. She volunteered to handle certain aspects of the planning that involved vendor negotiations and deposit payments, arguing that her design background gave her useful connections and expertise. I initially welcomed her involvement, appreciating both the help and the opportunity to include her more meaningfully in the process. Carmen's first major contribution involved finding a photographer whose work she had admired at a recent gallery showing. She arranged an initial consultation and secured a significantly discounted rate by emphasizing her professional connections and potential for future referrals. The photographer's portfolio was stunning, and the reduced price helped our budget accommodate additional expenses we hadn't initially anticipated. However, the payment arrangement Carmen negotiated included a substantial deposit that needed to be paid immediately to secure our wedding date. The timing was problematic because my next scheduled transfer to the wedding fund wouldn't occur for another 2 weeks. Carmen offered to advance the deposit using her own credit card, with the understanding that I would reimburse her as soon as the funds became available. This arrangement seemed reasonable and mutually beneficial. Carmen was helping secure an excellent photographer at a reduced rate, while I was getting professional wedding planning assistance from someone who understood both my vision and my budget constraints. The temporary nature of the financial arrangement felt manageable and appropriate given our family relationship. Similar situations arose with other vendors Carmen helped negotiate. She advanced deposits for the florist, the rental company for tables and linens, and the musicians we hired for cocktail hour. Each arrangement involved Carmen using her credit cards or cash reserves to secure vendor commitments, with the understanding that reimbursement would occur according to my established payment schedule for wedding expenses. The pattern of Carmen advancing money for wedding vendors created a growing list of debts I owed her, though neither of us maintained careful records of the exact amounts or due dates. The arrangements felt informal and family-oriented rather than business-like financial transactions. I trusted Carmen's memory and assumed she was tracking the various advances in whatever system worked best for her organizational style. Our mother's involvement in wedding planning was enthusiastic but limited by her financial constraints. She contributed by offering to pay for specific items that fit within her budget, including the rehearsal dinner and my wedding day jewelry. These contributions were meaningful gestures that demonstrated her support and investment in the celebration. Even though the monetary amounts were smaller than other expenses. Mom's excitement about the wedding was infectious and helped balance some of the stress that comes with coordinating a major event. She accompanied me to dress fittings, offered opinions on decoration choices, and helped address invitations during evening sessions at our kitchen table. Her presence during these activities made the planning process feel more like a family celebration and less like an overwhelming logistical challenge. The relationship between Jake's family and mine developed gradually throughout the engagement period. His parents lived in Scottsdale and had been married for 32 years. They owned a successful landscaping business and demonstrated the kind of financial stability I aspired to achieve. Jake's mother shared vendor recommendations and offered to help with decoration setup, creating connections that eased some of my planning anxiety. Jake's approach to wedding planning reflected his practical personality and engineering background. He created detailed timelines for vendor payments, maintained backup plans for outdoor weather contingencies, and researched permit requirements for our chosen venue. His systematic approach complemented my emotional investment in the celebration, creating a balanced partnership that made decisions easier and more confident. The guest accommodations required careful coordination because many of Jake's relatives would be traveling from out of state. We researched hotel options that offered group discounts and compiled detailed information about local attractions and restaurant recommendations. These logistical details consumed significant time but felt important for ensuring our guests would have positive experiences during their visit. Carmen's artistic expertise proved valuable when designing ceremony decorations that would complement the natural desert setting without competing with it. She sketched centerpiece concepts that incorporated local plants and flowers, created lighting plans that would enhance photography while maintaining romantic ambience, and suggested color palettes that would photograph beautifully against the botanical gardens landscape. Her creative contributions extended beyond visual elements to include music selection and ceremony structure. Carmen had attended numerous weddings through her work and social connections, giving her insights into what elements created memorable experiences versus those that felt routine or predictable. Her suggestions helped personalize our ceremony in ways that reflected our personalities and relationship history. The vendor management responsibilities Carmen assumed included maintaining communication schedules, tracking delivery dates, and coordinating setup timelines. Her organizational skills in these areas were surprisingly strong, despite her generally chaotic approach to personal financial management. She created detailed contact lists, maintained vendor contract files, and followed up on outstanding questions with professional efficiency. These positive contributions to wedding planning reinforced my trust in Carmen's commitment to making our celebration successful. She was investing significant time and energy into ensuring every detail met our standards, often prioritizing wedding tasks over her own freelance projects. Her dedication felt like evidence of sisterly love and family loyalty that went beyond mere obligation or convenience. The first red flag appeared on a Tuesday morning in February, exactly 8 weeks before my wedding date. I was performing routine maintenance on my financial spreadsheets when I noticed an unauthorized withdrawal from my wedding savings account. The amount was $1,500, and the transaction had occurred 3 days earlier during evening hours when I had been at work late for a staff meeting. My initial reaction was confusion rather than alarm. Banks made mistakes occasionally, and electronic transfers sometimes processed incorrectly due to technical glitches or clerical errors. I called the customer service line expecting a simple explanation and quick resolution. The representative who answered my call was helpful and thorough, walking me through the transaction details with professional courtesy. The withdrawal had been initiated through online banking using my login credentials and authorized with the correct security codes. According to their records, the transaction appeared legitimate and had been processed through standard security protocols. The money had been transferred to an external account that I didn't recognize, though the representative couldn't provide specific details about the receiving institution due to privacy regulations. My stomach began churning as the implications became clear. Someone with access to my banking information had deliberately stolen money from my wedding fund. The security measures I had considered foolproof had been circumvented by someone who knew my personal information well enough to navigate the authentication process successfully. The bank's fraud department required a formal complaint and detailed documentation before they could begin investigating the unauthorized transaction. I spent my lunch break completing paperwork and providing statements about my account security practices. The process was thorough but time-consuming, and the representative explained that resolution could take several weeks depending on the complexity of the investigation. Carmen was working from home that day when I returned from the bank with questions that needed immediate answers. I found her in the living room, surrounded by design materials for a client project, looking relaxed and focused on her creative work. Her casual demeanor struck me as odd given the financial crisis that was consuming my thoughts and energy. My approach was diplomatic rather than accusatory because I still believed there might be an innocent explanation for the missing money. Perhaps Carmen had borrowed the funds temporarily to cover an emergency expense and intended to replace them before I noticed. Her freelance income had been particularly irregular recently, and she might have felt desperate enough to make a poor decision without considering the consequences. Carmen's response to my questions was immediate and emphatic. She expressed shock and outrage about the theft, suggesting that someone must have gained access to my account through identity theft or computer hacking. Her reaction seemed genuine and appropriately concerned, though something about her body language felt slightly rehearsed. As if she had been preparing for this conversation, she offered to help investigate the situation by checking her own accounts for suspicious activity and contacting friends in the technology industry who might have expertise in cybersecurity issues. Her willingness to assist felt supportive, but I noticed she avoided making direct eye contact while discussing the specific details of the unauthorized transaction. The conversation continued for nearly an hour as we explored possible explanations for the security breach. Carmen suggested various scenarios involving stolen mail, compromised internet connections, or sophisticated phishing schemes that might have captured my banking credentials. Her knowledge of these potential threats seemed surprisingly detailed. For someone who generally showed little interest in financial security issues, over the following days, additional unauthorized transactions appeared on my account statements. Smaller amounts this time, ranging from $300 to $800, but following the same pattern of evening withdrawals using correct authentication procedures. Each incident required additional paperwork with the bank's fraud department and extended the investigation timeline further into the future. The frequency of these transactions created growing anxiety that affected my work performance and personal relationships. I found myself checking my account balance multiple times daily, losing sleep over financial projections, and becoming increasingly paranoid about account security. The emotional toll was perhaps even more significant than the monetary loss because it violated my sense of safety and control. That Jake's reaction to the theft was protective and practical. He offered to contribute additional funds to cover the missing money, suggested we consider postponing the wedding until the investigation was resolved, and recommended upgrading our account security measures to prevent future incidents. His support was unwavering, but I could sense his growing concern about the stress these events were causing me. The bank's investigation progressed slowly despite my frequent inquiries about potential leads or suspects. The fraud specialists explained that electronic theft cases often involved sophisticated criminals who understood how to exploit system vulnerabilities while minimizing their exposure to detection. They warned that recovery of stolen funds was not guaranteed even if the perpetrators were eventually identified. Carmen's behavior during this period became increasingly erratic in ways that seemed unrelated to my financial crisis but created additional household tension. She began working odd hours, taking phone calls in private, and receiving mail from financial institutions I didn't recognize. When I asked about these changes, she explained them as normal fluctuations in freelance work demands and personal business that didn't concern me. Her social activities also shifted dramatically during the weeks following the first theft. She began spending more time away from the apartment, often returning late at night with shopping bags from expensive stores. When I expressed curiosity about her sudden increase in disposable income, she mentioned landing several lucrative projects that required immediate payment due to client urgency. The timing of Carmen's financial improvement felt suspiciously coincidental with my account problems, but I struggled to reconcile this observation with my fundamental trust in family loyalty. The idea that my own sister might be stealing from my wedding fund seemed so outrageous that I dismissed it repeatedly, even as evidence continued accumulating in concerning patterns. My relationship with Mom became strained during this period because I couldn't bring myself to share the full details of the financial theft. I worried that discussing the situation would create family drama and potentially cast suspicion on Carmen without solid evidence. Instead, I mentioned having some temporary budget challenges that might require modest adjustments to wedding plans. Mom's response was characteristically supportive but limited by her own financial constraints. She offered to increase her contribution to the rehearsal dinner costs and suggested ways to reduce wedding expenses without compromising the overall quality of the celebration. Her practical advice was helpful, but I knew that the missing funds represented losses too significant to be covered through minor budget modifications. The wedding vendors began requesting final payments according to the timeline we had established months earlier. These deadlines created pressure that intensified my anxiety about the ongoing theft investigation and dwindling account balance. I found myself calculating and recalculating available funds, trying to determine which expenses could be delayed without jeopardizing vendor contracts. Carmen's role in managing vendor communications became more problematic as payment deadlines approached. She had assumed responsibility for coordinating with several suppliers, but her responses to their inquiries became increasingly vague and delayed. When I asked about the status of various arrangements, she assured me that everything was under control while providing few specific details about actual progress. The photographer who Carmen had originally negotiated with began expressing concerns about payment schedules and contract fulfillment. His messages, which Carmen initially handled, eventually came directly to me with requests for clarification about deposit amounts and final payment dates. The confusion in his communications suggested that information had been miscommunicated or lost somewhere in the process. Similar issues arose with other vendors Carmen had been managing. The florist called to confirm delivery details but mentioned discrepancies between the services discussed and the payments received. The rental company sent invoices that didn't match my records of previous deposits and contracted services. Each conversation revealed gaps in communication that created additional stress and confusion. My attempts to resolve these vendor issues were complicated by Carmen's incomplete record keeping and my own lack of direct involvement in the original negotiations. She had been acting as my representative with these businesses, but her organizational system was apparently less thorough than I had assumed. Reconstructing the details of various agreements required time and energy that I couldn't afford to spare. The cumulative effect of financial theft, vendor confusion, and approaching deadlines created a crisis atmosphere that permeated every aspect of my daily life. I struggled to maintain focus at work, found myself snapping at Jake over minor issues, and began experiencing physical symptoms of stress including headaches and insomnia. The wedding that was supposed to represent joy and celebration had become a source of constant anxiety. Jake suggested hiring a professional wedding coordinator to help manage the vendor issues and timeline pressures. The additional expense was problematic given our reduced budget, but the emotional relief of having expert assistance seemed worth the investment. We researched coordinators who specialized in last-minute crisis management and short timeline event execution. The coordinator we eventually hired was experienced in dealing with wedding emergencies and budget constraints. She quickly identified several areas where vendor miscommunications had created unnecessary complications and developed strategies for resolving outstanding issues efficiently. Her professional expertise provided perspective that helped reduce some of the panic I was experiencing. However, even professional assistance couldn't address the fundamental problem of missing funds and ongoing theft from my account. The coordinator's budget analysis revealed that successful completion of our planned celebration would require approximately $8,000 more than our remaining available resources. This gap represented the difference between the wedding we had envisioned and whatever alternative we could afford. Carmen's reaction to hiring the wedding coordinator was surprisingly negative. She expressed concern about the additional expense and questioned whether professional assistance was necessary for problems she believed could be resolved through better communication and organization. Her criticism felt particularly frustrating, given that many of the vendor issues had originated from her own management of those relationships. The coordinator's review of vendor contracts and communications revealed several troubling inconsistencies in the agreements Carmen had negotiated. Deposit amounts didn't match the totals she had reported to me, service details had been modified without my knowledge, and payment schedules had been altered in ways that created additional financial obligations. These discoveries raised serious questions about Carmen's handling of wedding-related finances. When confronted with these discrepancies, Carmen became defensive and argumentative. She insisted that vendor negotiations were fluid processes that required ongoing adjustments based on changing circumstances and availability. Her explanations were detailed and plausible, but they didn't address the fundamental question of why significant changes had been made without consulting me directly. The tension between us escalated dramatically during a confrontation about the missing deposit money Carmen had supposedly advanced to various vendors. When I requested documentation of these payments, she became evasive and claimed that her record-keeping system was less formal than what I was expecting. She suggested that my distrust was damaging our sisterly relationship and potentially jeopardizing the wedding preparations. Our argument that evening was the most serious conflict we had experienced as adults. Carmen accused me of being controlling and paranoid, while I expressed frustration about the lack of transparency in financial matters that directly affected my future. The conversation ended without resolution, leaving both of us angry and suspicious about each other's motivations and honesty. The moment that shattered everything happened on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks before my wedding date. I had taken a half-day off work to meet with the bank's fraud investigator, hoping for some progress on recovering my stolen funds. Detective Sarah Williams from the Phoenix Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit had requested a meeting to discuss their findings and present evidence they had uncovered during their investigation. Detective Williams was thorough and professional, spreading documents across the conference room table with the methodical precision of someone who had handled countless similar cases. She explained that electronic banking fraud often left digital fingerprints that skilled investigators could trace, even when perpetrators believed they had covered their tracks completely. The evidence she presented was overwhelming and undeniable. Bank security cameras had captured footage of someone using an ATM card linked to my account at various locations around Phoenix. The transaction times corresponded exactly with the unauthorized withdrawals I had reported. The person in the surveillance footage was clearly recognizable. despite attempts to obscure their appearance with sunglasses and baseball caps. It was Carmen, my sister. The person I had trusted with my deepest secrets, my wedding plans, and access to my personal information. She was methodically stealing money from my wedding fund while living in my apartment, eating meals I had purchased, and helping plan the celebration she was simultaneously destroying, Detective Williams explained. How Carmen had gained access to my banking credentials. She had been observing my login routine during the months we lived together, memorizing passwords and security codes while appearing to work on her laptop nearby. The investigation revealed a sophisticated pattern of observation and planning that demonstrated premeditation rather than impulsive theft. The total amount Carmen had stolen was even larger than I had realized. Beyond the obvious unauthorized transfers, she had been making smaller cash withdrawals using a duplicated debit card and had somehow gained access to my credit card information for online purchases. The combined theft exceeded $18,000, representing more than half of my carefully accumulated wedding fund. Detective Williams presented additional evidence that painted an even more disturbing picture of Carmen's deception. She had been using my stolen money to fund a completely separate lifestyle that included expensive purchases, luxury travel, and investments in photography equipment for her freelance business. Bank records showed transactions at high-end stores, premium restaurants, and vacation bookings that Carmen had never mentioned during our conversations about her financial struggles. The investigation had also uncovered evidence that Carmen had been planning to disappear before the wedding date. She had applied for an expedited passport renewal, researched extended stay accommodations in several European cities, and purchased a one-way airline ticket to Barcelona scheduled for departure 2 days before my wedding. The timeline suggested she intended to complete her theft and flee the country before I discovered the full extent of her betrayal. Perhaps most painfully, Detective Williams revealed that Carmen had been documenting her theft through photographs and journal entries found on her computer during the search warrant execution. These materials showed her celebrating successful withdrawals, mocking my financial planning efforts, and expressing satisfaction about undermining what she called my perfect little fairy tale wedding. The journal entries were particularly cruel because they revealed the depth of Carmen's resentment toward me and her deliberate intention to cause maximum emotional damage. She had written about feeling overshadowed by my stability and success, describing my engagement as evidence of a boring, conventional lifestyle she despised. The theft wasn't motivated by financial desperation but by jealousy and a desire to punish me for choices she considered inferior to her own. Reading excerpts from Carmen's journal was like being stabbed repeatedly by someone I loved. She had written about watching me stress over wedding details while knowing she was systematically destroying my ability to afford the celebration. She described feeling powerful and superior when I asked her advice about budget concerns, knowing she was the source of my financial problems. Detective Williams explained that Carmen had been arrested earlier that morning at our apartment while I was at work. She had been charged with multiple felonies including identity theft, wire fraud, and grand larceny. The evidence was so comprehensive that prosecution would likely result in significant prison time, especially given the premeditated nature of the crimes and the substantial amounts involved. The reality of Carmen's arrest and impending prosecution felt surreal and devastating simultaneously. My sister, the person who had been my maid of honor and closest family member, was now facing years in prison for systematically destroying my wedding plans. The betrayal was so complete and calculated that it challenged everything I thought I knew about family relationships and human nature. I drove home from the police station in a state of emotional shock that made simple tasks like operating traffic signals feel overwhelming. The apartment felt contaminated by Carmen's deception, every shared space now tainted with memories of her lies and manipulation. Her bedroom had been searched by police officers, leaving behind evidence tags and the hollow feeling of violated trust. Jake arrived within minutes of my phone call, abandoning an important work meeting to provide emotional support during this crisis. His reaction was protective fury mixed with genuine concern for my mental state. He held me while I cried, listening to the devastating details of Carmen's betrayal without offering empty reassurances or trying to minimize the pain I was experiencing. The immediate practical consequences of Carmen's theft were almost as overwhelming as the emotional impact. With 3 weeks remaining before the wedding, I needed to contact vendors about payment issues, inform guests about potential changes to plans, and somehow find ways to salvage what remained possible from our original vision. The stolen money couldn't be recovered quickly enough to meet upcoming vendor deadlines. Our wedding coordinator arrived that evening with revised budget projections and alternative celebration options that might be affordable given our reduced resources. Her suggestions were creative and thoughtful, but they represented massive compromises to everything Jake and I had been planning and anticipating. The outdoor garden ceremony might need to become a simple courthouse event, the elegant reception might become a casual backyard gathering. The most painful part of these discussions was acknowledging that Carmen's betrayal had succeeded in destroying the wedding we had envisioned. Even if some version of a celebration remained possible, it would be forever marked by her theft and deception. Every element we managed to salvage would carry reminders of what had been stolen and why our original plans had become impossible. Mom's reaction to Carmen's arrest was complicated by grief, shock, and maternal instinct to protect both daughters despite the circumstances. She arrived at our apartment that evening looking older and more fragile than I had ever seen her. The news of Carmen's systematic theft had shattered her understanding of our family dynamics and her confidence in her parenting decisions. She apologized repeatedly for not recognizing warning signs in Carmen's behavior, though I assured her that the deception had been sophisticated enough to fool everyone who trusted her. Mom offered to use her retirement savings to help cover wedding expenses, but her modest resources wouldn't make a significant impact on the $18,000 deficit Carmen had created. The conversation with Mom was heartbreaking because it revealed the full scope of Carmen's manipulation within our family. Mom admitted that Carmen had been borrowing money from her as well, using similar stories about temporary client payment delays and emergency expenses. These loans had never been repaid either, and Mom had been quietly struggling financially. While enabling Carmen's irresponsible behavior, Jake's family responded to the crisis with immediate practical support and emotional understanding. His parents offered to help cover essential wedding expenses, his siblings began coordinating alternative celebration ideas, and his grandmother insisted on contributing family jewelry to replace items we could no longer afford. Their generosity was overwhelming and demonstrated the kind of family support I had thought existed in my own relationships. The legal proceedings began immediately with Carmen's arraignment and bail hearing. She had been appointed a public defender and was being held on significant bail due to flight risk concerns stemming from her planned departure to Europe. Detective Williams explained that the case would likely take months to resolve through the court system, but the evidence was strong enough to ensure conviction on most charges. I struggled with conflicting emotions about Carmen's prosecution and potential imprisonment. Part of me wanted her to face consequences for the calculated nature of her betrayal, while another part grieved for the sister I thought I had known and loved. The criminal justice process felt both necessary and tragic, representing the complete breakdown of our family relationships. The media attention surrounding Carmen's arrest added another layer of complexity to an already overwhelming situation. Local news outlets picked up the story because of the unusual circumstances involving wedding theft and family betrayal. Reporters called requesting interviews, and neighbors began recognizing me from news coverage. The public scrutiny made private grieving nearly impossible. Social media reactions to the news story ranged from supportive sympathy to cruel commentary about family dynamics and personal naivety. Strangers felt entitled to judge my decision to trust Carmen with access to personal information, while others shared similar stories of financial betrayal by relatives. The online attention was largely unwelcome but highlighted how common these family financial crimes actually were. My employer was understanding about the personal crisis and offered flexible scheduling to accommodate legal proceedings and wedding plan modifications. Colleagues rallied with emotional support and practical assistance, including organizing a workplace fundraiser to help offset some of the stolen money. Their kindness provided evidence that chosen family could sometimes be more reliable than biological relationships. The stolen money represented more than just wedding expenses. It symbolized years of careful planning, disciplined saving, and dreams about beginning married life in a specific way. Carmen's theft had violated not just my financial security but my faith in family loyalty and personal judgment. The emotional recovery would likely take much longer than any practical adjustments to wedding plans. Jake and I spent evening hours discussing whether to proceed with a modified celebration or postpone the wedding entirely until we could rebuild our savings. The decision involved balancing practical financial concerns with emotional readiness to celebrate during such a painful period. Our relationship felt stronger despite the crisis, but the circumstances cast shadows over what should have been our happiest time. The theft had also revealed the extent to which I had been enabling Carmen's irresponsible financial behavior through years of small loans and casual arrangements. My desire to be a supportive sister had created opportunities for exploitation that a more distant relationship might have prevented. This realization required examining my own boundaries and decision-making patterns. Detective Williams contacted me again 2 days after Carmen's arrest with additional information that made the betrayal even more painful. The investigation had uncovered evidence that Carmen had been planning this theft for over 6 months, beginning her reconnaissance shortly after Jake's proposal. She had systematically gathered information about my banking habits, vendor payments, and financial planning processes while pretending to offer sisterly support. The most devastating revelation was that Carmen had never intended to serve as my maid of honor. Her enthusiastic participation in wedding planning had been entirely calculated to gain access to vendor information and payment schedules. Every moment of apparent excitement about my engagement and wedding plans had been an elaborate performance designed to facilitate her theft and betrayal. This final piece of evidence shattered any remaining hope that Carmen's actions had been impulsive mistakes or temporary lapses in judgment motivated by genuine financial desperation. She had deliberately chosen to destroy my wedding plans while pretending to support them, making her betrayal as psychologically devastating as it was financially destructive. The days following Carmen's arrest felt like living in an alternate reality where everything familiar had been twisted into something unrecognizable. The apartment that had been our shared home for 2 years now felt like a crime scene, every corner holding memories that had been retroactively poisoned by the knowledge of her deception. I found myself unable to sit in the living room where she had pretended to work on client projects while actually planning my financial destruction. Jake suggested I stay at his apartment temporarily, but something stubborn inside me refused to be driven from my own home by Carmen's betrayal. Instead, I began the emotionally exhausting process of removing every trace of her presence from our shared space. Her belongings had been sealed by police during the search warrant execution, leaving behind only the outline of a life I now realized had been largely fabricated. The vendor cancellation calls began on Friday morning and continued throughout the weekend. Each conversation required explaining that unforeseen circumstances had eliminated a significant portion of our wedding budget, without revealing the humiliating details of family theft. The reactions varied dramatically depending on the vendor's personality and business policies, creating a gauntlet of awkward negotiations and disappointed professionals. Our photographer was surprisingly understanding when I explained that we needed to scale back significantly from our original package. He offered alternative options including a smaller time commitment and fewer edited images, which would reduce costs while still providing professional documentation of whatever celebration we managed to arrange. His flexibility felt like a small miracle during a week of overwhelming obstacles. The florist proved more challenging to work with, insisting that our contract was binding regardless of personal financial setbacks. She had already ordered specialty blooms and begun preparation work that couldn't be cancelled without substantial penalties. The conversation became heated when she suggested that proper wedding planning should include contingency funds for unexpected expenses, implying that our situation reflected poor financial management rather than criminal victimization. The venue coordinator at Desert Botanical Garden was professional but inflexible regarding refund policies. Our contract specified that cancellation within 30 days of the event would result in forfeiture of all deposits and partial payment of remaining balances. The financial penalty for canceling would actually exceed the cost of proceeding with a simplified version of our original plans, creating a situation where we were trapped by our own advanced planning. Jake's response to these vendor complications was characteristically logical and solution-oriented. He researched contract law regarding circumstances beyond reasonable control, contacted our insurance company about potential coverage for theft-related losses, and began creating modified wedding scenarios that might satisfy vendor requirements while remaining within our reduced budget. His calm problem-solving approach provided stability during a period when my own decision-making abilities felt completely compromised. The insurance investigation added another layer of bureaucracy to an already overwhelming situation. Our homeowners policy included some coverage for personal property theft, but the specific circumstances of Carmen's crimes created complications regarding documentation and proof of loss. The claims adjuster required detailed records of my savings account history, vendor contracts, and police reports before processing could begin. Carmen's first phone call from jail came on Sunday evening, exactly 4 days after her arrest. I had been dreading this contact while simultaneously craving the opportunity to confront her about the devastation she had caused. Her voice sounded different through the institutional phone system, smaller and more vulnerable than the confident sister who had been stealing from me for months. She began the conversation with apologies that felt rehearsed and strategic rather than genuinely remorseful. Carmen claimed that her actions had been motivated by desperate financial circumstances that she had been too proud to discuss with family members. She insisted that she had intended to replace the stolen money before I discovered the theft, using income from freelance projects that had unfortunately been delayed beyond her control. Her explanation was elaborate and detailed, incorporating elements of truth about irregular freelance income and unexpected expenses that might have made her story plausible under different circumstances. However, knowing about the journal entries where she had documented her true motivations made her scripted remorse feel like another layer of manipulation designed to minimize consequences and maintain some possibility of forgiveness. When I confronted Carmen about the cruel journal entries Detective Williams had shared, her demeanor shifted dramatically from apologetic to defensive. She claimed that those writings represented temporary emotional states during stressful periods and didn't reflect her true feelings about our relationship. She suggested that private journals weren't meant to be taken literally and that everyone wrote things they didn't really mean when they were upset or frustrated. The conversation deteriorated rapidly as Carmen became increasingly agitated about what she called my unwillingness to understand her perspective or consider the pressures she had been facing. She accused me of being judgmental and unforgiving, suggesting that real sisters would find ways to work through family problems rather than allowing legal proceedings to destroy their relationship permanently. Her final comments before the call ended revealed the depth of her delusion about the situation she had created. Carmen actually suggested that I was overreacting to what she described as temporary borrowing that would have been resolved if I had been more patient and understanding. She seemed genuinely surprised that I considered her actions theft rather than family financial assistance that had gotten slightly out of control. That Jake's family gathered for an emergency dinner meeting that Sunday to discuss how they could help salvage some version of our wedding celebration. His parents, siblings, and several aunts and uncles contributed ideas and resources with generosity that highlighted the stark contrast between his family's supportiveness and my own family's dysfunction. Their immediate response was to problem solve rather than assign blame or express disappointment. Jake's grandmother offered her engagement ring as a replacement for jewelry we could no longer afford, while his mother volunteered to coordinate a reception at their family home instead of the expensive venue we had originally chosen. His brother, who was a skilled amateur photographer, suggested documenting the celebration himself if we needed to cancel our professional photographer. The family's collective response demonstrated the kind of support system I had thought existed. In my own relationships, however, their kindness also created complicated emotions about accepting help that felt like charity rather than mutual family investment. My pride had been severely damaged by Carmen's betrayal, and depending on Jake's family for financial assistance felt like another form of failure and vulnerability. I struggled to balance gratitude for their generosity with shame about needing rescue from my own family's destruction. The legal proceedings continued with Carmen's preliminary hearing, where she was formally charged with multiple felonies and scheduled for trial pending plea negotiations. Her court-appointed attorney had advised her to consider accepting a plea bargain that would involve restitution payments and several years of probation rather than risking a lengthy prison sentence if convicted at trial. Detective Williams explained that plea negotiations were common in financial crimes cases, especially when restitution was possible and defendants showed apparent remorse for their actions. However, Carmen's ability to pay restitution was questionable given her irregular income and lack of substantial assets. The stolen money had been spent on purchases and experiences that couldn't be easily liquidated to compensate for her crimes. The possibility of plea negotiations created another emotional complication because it required me to consider whether I wanted Carmen to face maximum legal consequences or whether I preferred focusing on financial recovery through restitution payments. The decision involved balancing my desire for justice with practical concerns about recovering enough money to proceed with wedding plans. Mom's emotional state deteriorated significantly during this period as she struggled to process the reality of Carmen's calculated betrayal and impending criminal prosecution. She had been visiting Carmen in jail daily, returning home exhausted and confused about how to maintain relationships with both daughters given the circumstances. Her maternal instinct to protect Carmen conflicted with her horror at the crimes that had been committed. The family dynamic became increasingly strained as Mom attempted to mediate between Carmen and me, suggesting that we should find ways to reconcile and move forward as a family despite the legal proceedings. She seemed to believe that sisterly forgiveness and family unity could somehow overcome the magnitude of Carmen's betrayal and the practical consequences of her theft. These well-meaning but naive suggestions created additional tension because they minimized the calculated nature of Carmen's crimes and the devastating impact on my wedding plans and financial security. Mom's desire to restore family harmony ignored the reality that trust had been systematically destroyed through months of deliberate deception and manipulation.
Work became my refuge during this chaotic period, providing structure and purpose when everything else in my life felt uncertain and compromised. My colleagues were supportive without being intrusive, offering assistance while respecting my privacy about family details. The routine of professional responsibilities created stability during a time when personal relationships felt completely unreliable. Dr. Harrison suggested I consider taking extended leave to deal with the legal proceedings and wedding crisis, but I preferred maintaining normal work schedules that provided distraction from the emotional turmoil. Staying busy with patient care and administrative duties prevented me from spending entire days obsessing about Carmen's betrayal and the impossible decisions I was facing about the wedding. The financial impact of Carmen's theft extended beyond wedding expenses to affect my long-term security and future planning. The stolen money had represented more than just celebration funds. It was the foundation for our married life together, emergency savings that would have provided security during the early years of marriage. Rebuilding that financial cushion would require years of additional saving and sacrifice. Jake and I began having difficult conversations about whether to proceed with marriage given the financial instability Carmen's theft had created. While our relationship felt stronger than ever, the practical challenges of starting married life without adequate savings created stress that affected our daily interactions and future planning discussions. The social consequences of Carmen's arrest became apparent as news of the theft spread through our extended social network. Friends and acquaintances responded with mixtures of sympathy, curiosity, and judgment about my family situation and decision-making. Some people offered support and assistance, while others seemed to view the situation as entertainment or evidence of poor judgment on my part. Wedding guests began calling with questions about whether the celebration would proceed as planned, creating additional pressure to make definitive decisions about our timeline and arrangements. Each conversation required explaining that we were still determining what would be possible given changed circumstances, without revealing embarrassing details about family theft and financial devastation. The vendor negotiations continued throughout the week with mixed results depending on individual business policies and the flexibility of specific professionals. Some vendors offered modified packages or payment plans that made their services more affordable, while others insisted on full contract compliance regardless of our circumstances. Each conversation felt like another small battle in a war I hadn't chosen to fight. Our wedding coordinator suggested exploring completely alternative celebration options that might preserve the emotional significance of the occasion while acknowledging our reduced resources. She presented ideas for casual outdoor gatherings, restaurant celebrations, and even destination elopements that would cost significantly less than our original plans while still marking the importance of our commitment. These alternative suggestions were creative and thoughtful, but they represented fundamental compromises to dreams and plans that had sustained us through months of engagement excitement. The stolen money had eliminated more than just purchasing power. It had destroyed the specific vision of how we wanted to begin our married life together. The insurance adjuster's preliminary assessment suggested that some reimbursement might be possible for documented theft losses, but the amount would be substantially less than the total Carmen had stolen. The claims process would take several months to complete, far too long to help with immediate wedding expenses and vendor deadlines. Carmen's second phone call from jail came midweek with a completely different tone than her first contact. Instead of apologies and explanations, she was angry and accusatory about what she called my vindictive response to family problems. She seemed to believe that pressing criminal charges was an overreaction designed to punish her rather than a natural consequence of her deliberate theft. 3 weeks after Carmen's arrest, on what should have been my wedding day, Jake and I made a decision that surprised everyone, including ourselves. Instead of wallowing in disappointment or rushing into a compromise celebration, we chose to postpone our wedding for exactly 1 year. The decision felt simultaneously practical and empowering, representing our commitment to creating the celebration we truly wanted, rather than settling for whatever Carmen's betrayal had left possible. The postponement announcement required difficult conversations with vendors, guests, and family members who had been expecting some form of resolution to our wedding crisis. Many people struggled to understand why we wouldn't simply proceed with a smaller celebration or courthouse ceremony. But Jake and I had realized that our wedding deserved to be born from joy and anticipation rather than trauma and financial desperation. This choice marked the beginning of a fundamental transformation in how I approached relationships, money, and personal boundaries. Carmen's betrayal had shattered my naive beliefs about family loyalty and unconditional trust, but it also created opportunities to build healthier patterns based on realistic expectations and mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. The first major change involved establishing complete financial independence that didn't depend on shared resources or family access to personal information. I opened new bank accounts at a different institution, implemented sophisticated security measures that prevented unauthorized access, and created separate emergency funds that only Jake and I could access. These practical steps felt like building walls, but they were actually creating foundations for genuine security.
Jake's response to our postponement decision revealed depths of character and commitment that made me fall in love with him all over again. Instead of expressing frustration about delayed plans or pressure to compromise, he embraced the opportunity to build an even stronger foundation for our future marriage. His support was unwavering and practical, focusing on what we could control rather than lamenting what had been lost. We used the unexpected gap year to address underlying issues that Carmen's crisis had revealed about family dynamics and personal boundaries. I began therapy with Dr. Patricia Valdez, a specialist in family trauma and financial abuse, who helped me understand how years of enabling Carmen's irresponsible behavior had created vulnerabilities that made her theft possible. Therapy sessions were initially difficult because they required examining my own role in creating conditions that allowed Carmen's exploitation to succeed. Dr. Valdez helped me understand that being supportive and generous weren't character flaws, but that healthy relationships required reciprocity and respect that had been missing from my interactions with Carmen for years. The legal proceedings against Carmen continued with plea negotiations that ultimately broke down when she refused to accept responsibility for the full scope of her crimes. Her attorney had advised accepting a deal that included restitution payments and 3 years of supervised probation. But Carmen insisted on maintaining that her actions had been temporary borrowing rather than deliberate theft. The decision to proceed to trial meant that the legal process would extend for many additional months, but it also meant that all evidence of Carmen's calculated betrayal would be presented publicly. Detective Williams explained that the comprehensive documentation of her planning and motivation would likely result in more severe penalties than any plea agreement would have included. My relationship with Mom required careful rebuilding around new boundaries that acknowledged Carmen's crimes while preserving our mother-daughter connection. Mom initially struggled to accept that reconciliation with Carmen might be impossible, but therapy helped her understand how her own enabling patterns had contributed to the family dysfunction that made such betrayal possible. The process of educating Mom about financial boundaries and healthy family relationships was challenging because it required her to examine decades of parenting decisions and family patterns. She began attending her own counseling sessions to address guilt about Carmen's choices and anxiety about maintaining relationships with both daughters given the circumstances. Jake and I used our postponement year to strengthen our partnership through premarital counseling that addressed how external family drama could affect our marriage. We learned communication strategies for handling financial stress, developed protocols for dealing with family boundary violations, and created shared values around money management that would protect our future household from outside interference. The counseling process revealed that our relationship had actually been strengthened by surviving Carmen's betrayal together. We had faced a major crisis during our engagement and emerged with deeper trust and clearer understanding of each other's characters. The experience had tested our partnership under extreme circumstances and proven our ability to support each other through devastating challenges. Financial recovery became a shared project that brought Jake and me closer together while building practical skills for our future marriage. We created aggressive savings plans that would restore our wedding fund, while also establishing emergency reserves that could protect us from future financial shocks. The discipline required felt empowering rather than restrictive, because it represented taking control over our circumstances. My career development accelerated during this period as I channeled energy from wedding planning into professional advancement. I pursued additional certifications in dental hygiene, took on leadership responsibilities at the practice, and began exploring opportunities for specialization that would increase my earning potential. The focused career development felt like building personal security that no one could steal or compromise. The vendor relationships from our original wedding plans created unexpected opportunities for future celebration planning.
Several vendors offered to honor our original pricing despite the year delay, appreciating our integrity in handling a difficult situation rather than simply canceling and disappearing. These gestures of professional respect felt like validation during a period when trust in relationships was being rebuilt. Carmen's trial began 8 months after her arrest, creating a media spectacle that attracted attention throughout Phoenix due to the unusual circumstances involving wedding theft and sibling betrayal. Local news outlets covered the proceedings extensively, requiring me to navigate public scrutiny while protecting my privacy and emotional well-being during testimony and court appearances. Testifying against Carmen in court was simultaneously empowering and heartbreaking. Reading portions of her journal entries aloud for the jury felt like a final confrontation with the sister I thought I had known, while also providing public validation that her actions had been calculated and deliberate, rather than impulsive mistakes. The jury deliberation lasted only 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Carmen's sentence included 4 years in state prison, restitution payments that would continue for decades, and permanent loss of access to any of my personal or financial information. The justice felt satisfying, but hollow, representing closure on legal proceedings rather than emotional healing. Carmen's conviction created opportunities for genuine forgiveness that wasn't based on minimizing her crimes or restoring our previous relationship. I wrote her a letter explaining that I forgave her for my own peace of mind, but that forgiveness didn't include trust, contact, or pretending that our sisterly relationship could be restored to its previous state.
The restitution payments from Carmen's eventual employment provided some financial recovery, though the amounts were modest given her limited earning potential and the other debts she had accumulated. The monthly payments felt less important for their monetary value than for their symbolic acknowledgement of the damage she had caused and her ongoing responsibility for making amends. Mom's relationship with both daughters eventually stabilized around acceptance that our family structure had been permanently altered by Carmen's choices. She maintained limited contact with Carmen through letters and supervised visits, while building a healthier relationship with me based on mutual respect and clear boundaries about financial support and family obligations. The wedding planning process, when we resumed it 8 months into our postponement year, felt completely different from our original experience. Instead of being driven by anxiety about perfection and detailed control over every element, we approached planning with confidence about our priorities and clear communication about what truly mattered for our celebration. Our vendor selections were based on relationships with professionals who had demonstrated integrity and flexibility during our crisis period. The photographer who had offered modified packages during our financial emergency became our first choice because his response to our difficulties had revealed character that mattered more than any portfolio considerations. The venue search led us to a different location that better reflected who we had become during our year of growth and healing. Instead of the botanical garden that would always carry associations with Carmen's betrayal, we chose a mountain resort that offered natural beauty combined with symbolic representation of reaching new heights together. Guest list decisions were easier the second time because we had learned to prioritize people who had demonstrated genuine support during our crisis over those who were merely obligated invitations. Our wedding would celebrate relationships that had proven their value rather than trying to maintain appearances with distant connections. The financial discipline we had developed during our recovery year meant that our postponed wedding would actually be more lavish than our original plans, funded entirely through our own savings without any borrowed money or family assistance. The self-sufficiency felt empowering and ensured that our celebration would be genuinely ours, rather than dependent on anyone else's contributions or approval. The Jake family integration became even stronger during our postponement year as they witnessed our resilience and commitment to building a healthy marriage despite external challenges. His grandmother insisted that her engagement ring should be reset with additional stones to commemorate our journey through adversity, creating an heirloom that honored both family tradition and our unique story. Professional counseling had equipped us with tools for maintaining healthy relationships that wouldn't enable dysfunction or boundary violations from anyone in our extended families.
We learn to offer support without sacrificing our own security and to maintain loving connections while protecting our marriage from external manipulation. The therapy process also helped me understand that Carmen's betrayal, while devastating, had actually provided valuable lessons about trusting wisely rather than blindly. I learned to distinguish between supporting people I loved and enabling destructive behavior that ultimately helped no one involved. Career advancement during our postponement year included opportunities to mentor newer dental hygienists and share expertise about maintaining professional boundaries with difficult patients. The skills I had developed for protecting myself from family financial abuse translated directly into workplace situations involving manipulation and inappropriate requests. Our rescheduled wedding date was set for exactly 1 year after our original plans, representing a full cycle of growth and healing that had transformed both our relationship and our individual characters. The symbolism felt meaningful rather than forced, acknowledging what we had survived while celebrating what we had built together. Financial planning for our future marriage included protections against identity theft and unauthorized access that went far beyond standard security measures. We implemented systems that would prevent anyone from repeating Carmen's crimes while still allowing us to maintain generous and supportive relationships with trustworthy family members and friends. The year of postponement had taught us that real love and commitment could survive external attacks and emerge stronger through mutual support and shared problem-solving. Our wedding would celebrate not just our decision to marry, but our proven ability to build a partnership that could weather serious challenges and grow stronger through adversity. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in late March, exactly 2 weeks before our rescheduled wedding date. The return address featured an elegant coat of arms that I didn't recognize, with postmark indicating international delivery from London. I assumed it was promotional material from a luxury vendor trying to capitalize on wedding announcements published in local newspapers. Jake was brewing coffee when I opened the envelope at our kitchen table, expecting to find marketing materials that would go directly into recycling. Instead, I discovered heavy cream-colored cardstock with formal calligraphy that began with words that made my hands tremble. Her Royal Highness Princess Catherine requests the honor of your presence. The invitation was addressed to Miss Rebecca Martinez and Mr. Jake Patterson, requesting our attendance at a private reception honoring international healthcare professionals at Kensington Palace. The date coincided exactly with our planned honeymoon week, and the invitation specified that travel and accommodation expenses would be provided for selected guests and their spouses.
My first reaction was disbelief, followed by confusion about how British royalty had learned about my existence, let alone considered me worthy of international recognition. I read the invitation multiple times before calling Jake over to confirm that I wasn't hallucinating or misunderstanding the formal language of royal correspondence. Jake's engineering mind immediately shifted into research mode, examining the invitation's paper quality, printing techniques, and security features to determine authenticity. He photographed the coat of arms and conducted reverse image searches that confirmed the invitation matched official royal correspondence protocols. His analysis concluded that the invitation was either genuine or an extremely sophisticated forgery. The explanation arrived 2 days later in a phone call from Dr. Harrison, my employer, who had apparently received similar correspondence from the palace requesting additional information about my professional background and qualifications. The mystery began unraveling as he explained how this extraordinary opportunity had developed without my knowledge. 6 months earlier, Dr. Harrison had submitted my name for an international dental hygiene excellence program sponsored by several European healthcare organizations. He had highlighted my community volunteer work, professional development achievements, and leadership in mentoring newer practitioners. The submission had been routine paperwork that he completed annually for staff members, never expecting significant response. The nomination had somehow reached Princess Catherine's charitable foundation, which was developing programs to recognize healthcare professionals who demonstrated exceptional service to underserved communities. My volunteer work at free dental clinics throughout Phoenix had apparently impressed the selection committee, leading to my inclusion among 20 international recipients being honored. The irony was overwhelming. Carmen's theft had been motivated partly by resentment toward my conventional success and stable lifestyle choices. She had written in her journal about my boring career and predictable future, mocking my dedication to professional development and community service. Now, those same qualities were being recognized by British royalty, creating opportunities she could never have imagined. The royal invitation required immediate response regarding our ability to attend, but Jake and I needed time to process the implications for our wedding plans and honeymoon arrangements. The timing meant we could either attend the palace reception or take our planned honeymoon trip to Hawaii, but not both given the scheduling constraints. Our conversation about this impossible choice revealed how much we had both grown during our year of postponement and healing. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by complicated logistics or torn between competing desires, we approached the decision with calm communication and shared problem solving that demonstrated our strengthened partnership. Jake's response was characteristically supportive and practical. He researched London attractions we could explore during our stay, investigated photography opportunities at locations we had dreamed of visiting, and suggested that a royal reception might create more memorable honeymoon experiences than traditional beach relaxation. The decision to accept the royal invitation and modify our honeymoon plans felt natural and exciting rather than stressful or complicated. We had learned to embrace unexpected opportunities while maintaining confidence in our ability to adapt plans according to changing circumstances. The notification letter that accompanied our formal response provided additional details about the palace reception and recognition ceremony. I would be receiving an award for community healthcare service, along with a small monetary prize that would be presented during the formal program. The recognition felt surreal, given that my volunteer work had always been motivated by personal satisfaction rather than external validation. Preparing for a royal reception required research and shopping that felt like planning for an elaborate costume party. Neither Jake nor I had experience with formal British etiquette or dress codes appropriate for palace events. We spent hours researching protocol requirements and appropriate attire for meeting members of the royal family. The shopping experience was entertaining and slightly overwhelming as we selected formal wear that would meet royal standards while remaining within our carefully managed budget. Jake's suit required custom alterations to achieve the precise fit expected at formal events, while my dress selection involved consultations with specialists who understood royal reception requirements. Our wedding guests were fascinated by news of the royal invitation, with many expressing excitement about our unexpected opportunity to represent Arizona at an international ceremony. The story spread through our social networks and professional communities, creating local media interest that felt manageable and positive rather than intrusive. Dr. Harrison arranged for local news coverage of my royal recognition, positioning the story as positive representation for Arizona's healthcare community and small business dental practices. The interviews were enjoyable opportunities to discuss community healthcare needs and the importance of preventative dental care for underserved populations. The media attention created interesting contrast with the previous year's coverage of Carmen's trial and theft. Instead of being known as a victim of family financial betrayal, I was being celebrated for professional achievement and community service. The shift in public narrative felt like another form of healing and closure. Carmen's reaction to news of my royal invitation came through a letter forwarded by Mom, who maintained limited correspondence despite their estranged relationship. The letter was brief and grudgingly congratulatory, acknowledging that my success was probably deserved, while maintaining undertones of resentment about what she called my perfect life.
Her response confirmed that time in prison hadn't produced genuine insight into her character flaws or sincere remorse for the damage she had caused. The letter felt like closure rather than reconciliation, demonstrating that my decision to maintain boundaries and protect myself from further manipulation had been wise and necessary. Mom's excitement about the royal invitation was touching and genuine, representing her pride in my achievements without the complicated dynamics that had previously characterized our family relationships. She offered to help with trip preparations and expressed gratitude that positive recognition was balancing the previous year's difficulties and pain. The royal reception itself exceeded every expectation we had developed during our preparation period. Kensington Palace was magnificent beyond anything photographs could convey, with architecture and decorations that created atmosphere of timeless elegance and historical significance. The staff members were gracious and professional, ensuring that every guest felt welcomed and comfortable. Princess Catherine was genuinely engaged during individual conversations with each honoree, demonstrating detailed knowledge about our specific contributions and asking thoughtful questions about healthcare challenges in our respective communities. Her interest felt authentic rather than obligatory, creating personal connections that made the formal ceremony feel meaningfully personal. The award presentation included a crystal sculpture engraved with my name and recognition details, along with a monetary prize of £5,000 that would help fund additional community healthcare initiatives. The physical award was beautiful, but the validation of work that had always been personally meaningful felt more valuable than any monetary recognition. Jake's presence during the ceremony provided emotional support and shared joy that enhanced every aspect of the experience. His pride in my achievement was evident and genuine, demonstrating the partnership strength we had built through surviving Carmen's betrayal and emerging with deeper mutual respect and appreciation. The other honorees came from diverse international backgrounds, creating opportunities for conversations about global healthcare challenges and innovative solutions being implemented in different countries. These professional connections felt inspiring and educational, expanding my perspective about potential future directions for community service work. Our extended stay in London allowed exploration of historical sites, cultural attractions, and dining experiences that created honeymoon memories far more unique than any traditional beach vacation could have provided. The combination of royal recognition and romantic travel felt like perfect celebration of our marriage and our journey through adversity. The return flight to Phoenix included time for reflection about the extraordinary chain of events that had transformed our wedding crisis into international recognition and royal celebration. Carmen's theft had ultimately led to delayed marriage plans that made the palace invitation possible, creating positive outcomes that never could have been anticipated during our darkest moments. Dr. Harrison's welcome back celebration at the dental practice included local news coverage and community recognition that elevated the profile of our clinic and its commitment to serving diverse patient populations. The royal recognition created marketing opportunities and patient interest that benefited the entire practice, while highlighting the importance of preventative dental care. The wedding itself, when it finally occurred 2 weeks after our return from London, felt like celebration of everything we had survived and achieved, rather than simply marking the beginning of our marriage. The ceremony incorporated elements inspired by our palace experience, including readings about service to others and commitment to building communities. Our wedding guests included new friends we had met through the healthcare recognition program, adding international elements to our celebration while honoring local relationships that had supported us through difficult times. The guest list reflected the growth and change we had experienced during our postponement year. The reception featured stories about our royal adventure alongside traditional wedding toasts and celebration activities. Instead of feeling like tangential experiences, the palace invitation and marriage celebration felt like integrated parts of a larger story about building meaningful lives through service, commitment, and resilience. The monetary awards from both the Royal Recognition Program and our lawsuit settlement against Carmen provided funds for establishing a community dental clinic that would serve low-income families throughout Phoenix. This project felt like positive legacy, emerging from negative experiences, transforming theft and betrayal into resources for helping others. Carmen's restitution payments continued according to court-ordered schedules, providing modest but steady acknowledgement of her responsibility for the damage she had caused. The money felt less important than the symbolic recognition that justice had been served and accountability maintained.
Our marriage began with financial security, clear boundaries with family members, and shared commitment to building a partnership based on mutual respect and support rather than obligation or expectation. The foundation felt solid and trustworthy in ways that would have been impossible without surviving the crisis that tested our relationship. The royal recognition opened doors for additional professional opportunities, including speaking engagements about community healthcare service and leadership development programs for healthcare professionals. These activities felt like natural extensions of work that had always been personally meaningful rather than burdensome obligations. Looking back on the entire experience, from Carmen's betrayal through royal recognition to marriage celebration, I realized that the most painful periods had ultimately led to the most significant growth and positive transformation. Carmen's theft had shattered illusions about family loyalty while creating opportunities for building healthier relationships and stronger personal boundaries. The woman who had walked out of that restaurant 2 years earlier during Dad's birthday dinner was broken and desperate for validation. The woman I had become was strong, confident, clear about her own worth, and capable of building relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency or family obligation. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.